All right, and we are live with another edition of the Thursday Night Telegram live stream. Thank you all for joining me this evening. That was Ceremony by New Order to lead us into tonight's show. I have a very, well, depends on who you talk to, but my opinion of New Order can be kind of sacrilegious because I consider Joy Division to be sort of like the garage band, and then New Order is the band that went out of the garage and became something fantastic and great and refined. But some people don't like that, and they think Joy Division is the superior version, the superior manifestation of the band. But I've always had a more of an inclination for New Order, which isn't to say that Joy Division isn't great, but I just prefer New Order a little bit more. Anyway, hope all of you are doing all right. I'm in a different place tonight. Again, always moving around, which is actually going to be somewhat the theme of tonight's stream. Just to remind you before we get started fully that you can always call in towards the end of the towards the end of the stream. You can call in with whatever's on your mind, or if you want to continue the conversation about whatever the theme has been. Also, you can be active in the chat, the Pox Populi chat. Just type that into Telegram. If you're not in the chat, just type that in all lowercase Pox Populi chat, and you can join the group, the live chat. And then also you can send super chats on the Entropy link, which is in the promotional post for tonight's stream. And those are the ways that you can interact. Reed Johnson says, Bernard Sumner gets massive credit for stepping into the lead role of the remnants of Joy Division and saving the band. Yeah, it's a really fascinating story. And I quite like Bernard Sumner. I did a long time ago. I did a chat with Thomas Baden Rees, and it was Urber Derber. Pardon, sorry. I was on Urber Derber's show, of course, because he's the one who did had a lot of music in his show, being a musician as he is. And we talked a little bit about New Order. And Bernard Sumner, for me, he's like, as a vocalist, as a lyricist, okay, he might leave a bit to be desired. Some of his rhyming schemes are a bit childish sometimes. But I think on the whole, he did a really good job with New Order. And in fact, that song, Ceremony, that's one of their first tracks that they recorded after the death of Ian Curtis. So I think you can still hear even the kind of Joy Division, that sort of garage band tone to that song. There's a really great film about Ian Curtis and the rest of the band, and it's not 24-hour Party People, which some people like that film, others hate it. It's called Control, and it's directed by, if I recall the name correctly, it's Anton Corbijn. It's a Dutch filmmaker, also a big Joy Division and New Order fan. And what's curious about Control is well, first of all, it's really, really good. I highly recommend it. It's a very good biopic about Ian Curtis. Very well made, very cinematic. The cinematography is very good. Anton Corbijn made a lot of music videos for New Order. And so this was kind of like a labor of love for him. But what's curious about it is that the lead actor who plays Ian Curtis does a phenomenal job. Amazing. And yet I've never seen him in anything else. I don't know what happened to this actor. Like, he was the talk of the town. I think he even won some awards at the Berlin Film Festival or something. He came away with something of like the best new coming actor, best up and coming actor, something like that. And I just don't know what happened to him. I haven't seen him in anything. I don't know if he's been a lead actor in anything significant, or if he's just been like, kind of working on table scraps. But that would be a shame because he was really good in Control. So anyway, if you like Joy Division, if you like New Order, and if you like good films, good biopics, definitely one to recommend. And I don't recall any sort of pause or anything like that. It's from a long time ago, this film. I say a long time ago. It's from like, here, it's from 2007. So yeah, I mean, quite some time ago. I don't think this film had any sort of like anti-whites or anything like that going on, any narrative like that. It's just a pretty straightforward tale of Ian Curtis and what his life was like. The actor's name is Sam Riley, and he married the actress Alexandra Maria Lara. Who, I remember that. Yeah, he married. She's quite attractive. Yeah, she plays his sort of the temptress who sort of tempts him away from his wife in the film. Sam Riley. Let's see if he's done anything significant since. My internet connection is very wonky today, so I might not even be able to do this. Sam Riley, actor. British actor, rose to acclaim portraying the poetic lead singer Ian Curtis. Okay, let's see. I mean, he's got lots of titles here. He's obviously he's in stuff. He's working on a post-production film right now called Firebrand. She Is Love, Way Down, Madame Curie. He's in a film about Madame Curie with Rosamund Pike. I don't like that actress. Okay, streaming Prime Video. I guess that's sort of thing too. Nobody's doing cinema anymore. Everyone's gone onto streaming platforms, and I just don't watch streaming platforms. I don't have any interest in having like 16 different streaming platforms and watching all the various paused crap that they make. So if that's what he's been doing for the last few years of his career, is just appearing in films on streaming platforms, yeah, that's why I don't have any idea what he's been up to. Yeah, there she is. That's Alexandra Maria Lara. Yes, very fine specimen of a European woman, I must admit. Okay, so lots to talk about. We've got the latest news coming out of the United Kingdom is the resignation of the Prime Minister, the shortest lasting Prime Minister in history. So goodbye to Liz Truss. Trust the plan, as Nick Gilly put it today on Telegram. Outlasted by a head of lettuce. Then, of course, other things that happened during the course of the week. We had the tragic murder of Lola Davier in France at the hands of a group of Nigerians, including one woman. It appears that all, certainly at least the woman, were in France illegally. The woman who was involved in this gang of kidnappers and rapists and killers, and perhaps even organ traffickers, had an expired student visa and could have been deported in August, just following the letter of the law. It would not have been some human rights violation, or there would have been no need to bring in, human rights courts or any of that nonsense. Her visa expired and she had no longer any right to be in that country. Although at this point, I don't really care about legalities. I haven't cared about these legalities for a long time. I'm an ethno-nationalist, and I believe that our race should have its own space, and that we can definitely argue on that ground. We don't need to get into the details of visas and passports and, oh, well, he was born here. I don't care anymore. This needs to stop. It should have stopped years ago. It's heartening to see that many French people seem to have been stirred into action because of this horrific crime. And the name of Lola Davier is on the lips of many people throughout the world in a way that usually happens with the martyred Dindus and blacks in America, or Syrian refugee babies. We all remember their names: George Floyd, Baby Allen, Hands Up, Don't Shoot, all these things, Emmett Till, blah, blah, blah. And very rarely are the names of European victims remembered. They are often swept under the rug, ignored, and then if they do have their names released publicly, our memories seem very short with those names. But in this case, I'm very heartened to see that the name Lola Davier is being spoken, is being said, is being remembered. And it seems that in France, the French population has been stirred to action and is taking to the streets. Manifestations, marches are being organized all across the country. I did publish a screenshot of an image that is sort of advertising the sort of protest march or gathering for Lola in the city of Toulouse. But there should be a change. I don't know if any of you are from France or live in France. The site in Toulouse has been changed. So maybe I'll post that later, just in case there are some Frenchies. But I think if you're in France, you're probably following French accounts or French online figures or etc. So you know that at least the venue for Toulouse has been changed. But there are venues being planned all over Paris as well, marches in Paris, all over the country. Some activists also went about their city posting really good pro-white propaganda, pro-Lola propaganda, with expressions like Lola Davier, killed by immigration, immigration kills, Lola Davier, remember her name, do not forgive, do not forget. So very, very good things going on there. Things that we should do too, and we have every right to. We have every right to. When George Floyd died, it caused a global protest. Global. And I say caused, when really it was astroturfed. It was completely, top down, created by people with power, with connections, and with money. But the point is, there is clearly acceptance to the death of an individual being the motivating cause for people to take to the streets and demand justice, whatever you want to call it. In the case of George Floyd, there wasn't much justice to be demanded. The man died of a drug overdose. Although apparently saying that can get you in a lot of legal trouble with the Floyd family, as Kanye West is finding out. But we know that these things happen. Some armed black criminal about to take the life of a police officer or in the act of committing a violent crime is gunned down by police who had no other alternative. And I'm not defending the blue line here. I'm not backing the blue. But in the cases of the handful of black criminals who get shot and killed by the police, every single one of them is a justified shooting, a justified killing. And these names and those individuals, those criminals, they become a sort of cause du jour, and people all over the black community, people all over the progressive left are inspired, if not to say they use, but they are inspired, certainly, by the death of those individuals to take to the streets and make certain demands on society and on power. So do not let anyone say that Europeans, that the French are politicizing the death of Lola. Do not let anyone say that Europeans, the French, are taking advantage of Lola's death to promote racism, xenophobia, because they are the ones who do it all the time. They are the ones who take the cadaver, the corpse of a drowned baby, and manipulate it, put it on its face down in the sand, to make better photo ops, to guilt trip Germans into taking in 1 million refugees from Syria. That happened in 2015. The examples are countless. So don't let anyone say that we can't demand justice for our kin as well. And this isn't the first time. Lola Davier is not the first victim. And as many people have said in my chat, responding to the heartening sight of French people taking to the streets, demanding justice, remembering her name, many people have said, that's great to see, but it's really sad that it took the death of a 12-year-old girl, it took the kidnapping, raping, brutalizing, torturing, and ultimately horrific murder of a 12-year-old girl to stir the French into the same sort of action that we see all the time carried out by other races and other groups. But Lola Davier wasn't even the first one. The Europeans could have done this years ago. Americans could be doing this pretty much every month with the black on white crime that happens there. But in the case of Europe, the number of victims that we have of Europeans whose lives have been taken by so-called refugees, so-called asylum seekers, genuine terror cells, economic migrants, invaders. I mean, where to begin? How is it that the bus running over dozens and dozens of people on the Promenade des Anglais in Nice did not inspire this kind of reaction? How is it that the attacks on the Bataclan Theatre and the Stade de France, or was it the Stade Denis? Can't remember which one, but the attacks happened there as well, and then spilled out all over Paris. How is it that those attacks didn't inspire the French? Or the rape and murder of Victorine, another French woman who was brutalized by an invader, a non-European invader. And this happens in other European countries too, time and again. So really, this reaction is a long time coming. It isn't that, oh, it's good to see, but I wish it hadn't cost the life of a 12-year-old girl. No, this has cost the life of dozens and dozens and hundreds, thousands of victims. So this is unfortunately the slow boil that it takes to stir modern people into action. And to be honest, I've thought about this a lot, especially during the 2 years of COVID tyranny and all the nonsensical, capricious restrictions and oppression of our everyday lives. I think about this a lot every time there is an atrocity like this. I'm not actually convinced that this is that this sort of lackadaisical, dragging your feet, just, shrugging your shoulders or getting mad online, but, then not really doing anything. I don't think that's entirely modern. I think if you look at history, you will see many examples of people who were oppressed, abused, terrorized for years, for generations, until one day, certain people couldn't take it anymore, and they organized. They learned from the mistakes of failed uprisings, of failed freedom fighters, and they decided enough was enough. As is famously stated, we're not going to take it anymore. And they fight back. So I think, the unfortunate reality is it does take a boiling over moment. It does take a slow accumulation of victims. And what's good about being in our little circle is that we are aware of these problems. So we can better survive these dangers, and our loved ones can better survive these dangers because we know what to warn them about and what to protect them from. I've often said, not entirely jokingly, that racism will save your life in this day and age. The knowledge that, no, we're not all the same, and no, this neighborhood isn't just as safe as any other neighborhood. We're all the same. We're all God's children. We're all whatever. So let's go for a nighttime walk in this ghetto. Oh, it's okay for my daughter to have a black boyfriend. Oh, I'm going to take in a Nigerian refugee into my home. No, we know better than that. And so ourselves and our loved ones won't suffer these horrible endings. And more people are realizing that, and more people are thinking like us. Quite a few people in the dissident right, in general, in politics, are easily frustrated, and they ask always, when are we going to do something? What are we doing? And my response has always been, this is what I'm doing. This is what we're doing. It may not be heroic in comparison to the deeds of the 1916 Easter Uprising. It might not be heroic compared to the deeds of William Wallace and Robert the Bruce. It might not be heroic compared to the men who fought back against communist Soviet occupation in the countries of Eastern Europe. But we are fighting a propaganda war. And there is no distinction between civilian and soldier. We are all in it. Whether you make stuff, whether you stream, whether you make videos, whether you make memes, or whether you just like and subscribe, you are in this propaganda war. And the 21st century, this age we're living in, is different than past ages. The necessity for violence is reduced. In fact, violence might even be counterproductive because people are so averse to it. And we've been growing up, most people grew up in an age of human rights and peace and civil disobedience. And so acts of violence are not only frowned upon, but they are shocking, and they evoke disgust, not admiration and support. This is the old question of optics and things like that. So as much as a part of me thinks that a day might come when there will be physical conflict or a need to rise up to take up arms against the oppressor, as much as a part of me might even yearn for that or be afraid of it, I ultimately think it's not necessary. Because as corny as it sounds, it's a war of ideas. That is why, as a friend of mine, American Krogan, has put it, mass media is the most powerful weapon ever created. And it's not really a novel idea. The pen is mightier than the sword. That's an ancient expression. How many pop stars, singers, actors, all these vainglorious artist types, how many of them have said throughout the ages, throughout the decades, that what they do is, a song is more powerful than a bomb? They're right, certainly in the modern age. But even in ancient times, the minstrels, the poets, the court jester, people who could sway public opinion with a joke or a story or a song, were always, depending on the situation, feared by the ruling class, employed by the ruling class. So this is nothing new. So people who get frustrated and write in all caps and shout into the void, "What are we doing? We need to avenge her." Well, we have to fight the paradigm war. We have to fight to shift the paradigm. And the fact that French people are organizing protests, organizing marches in honor of Lola Davier, the fact that her name is being remembered, that her face is being put up on the streets of French cities, next to the slogan, "Lola Davier killed by immigration," that is a win. That is victory in the context of today's war. People ask, what does winning look like? And the answer, depending on the situation, depending on the country, depending on many variables, but an answer to that question is victory looks like European peoples taking their own side, no longer being afraid of being called a racist or a xenophobe, no longer operating within the framework of the liberals, the progressives, the open borders types, the blank slate types, and instead taking the front foot and saying no. We say no. Enough is enough. France is for the French, and we're not going to argue about what it means to be French. We're going to take it as prima facie truth that to be French is to be white, that to be French is to be European, and people from Somalia, people from Mongolia, people from Nigeria, people from Saudi Arabia are not French and cannot be. And that's the end of the discussion. And we're not going to argue about the intricacies of legal immigration or illegal immigration or refugees or any of that. The legal immigration is just as much, if not more, of a problem than the illegal immigration. Enough is enough. We are saying no. And the more and more people who think like that, the more and more people who see that it's okay to think like this and take your own side and take the front foot instead of apologizing and defending yourself and whataboutism and, oh, look at the hypocrisy, the better the paradigm will shift. Imagine being on a hijacked plane. Think of a hijacked plane or a hijacked train. You have what? 4 assailants, maybe? It can't be a numerous unit. 4 or 5 guys. They're not going to have incredible weaponry. Maybe edged weapons, blunt force weapons, some type of firearm. And the train is full of people, or the plane is full of people. But what happens? The passengers don't do anything. But you and I both know, without even having to be in that situation, we both know that in that train or on that plane, pretty much every passenger at one point or another will think, somebody has to do something. I have to do something. But why does nobody do anything? Because they think that if they're the one that gets up and tries to tackle one of the guys, one of the hijackers, no one will have his back. And the person next to him who's thinking, I should do something, also thinks that if I get up and try and tackle one of these guys, no one's going to have my back. And so everyone stays glued to their seats in fear. But what we are seeing now is slowly, the passengers are looking to one another and realizing, if I get up, this guy's going to have my back. If I say enough is enough, European lives matter, other people are going to say it too. This is massively important. And we're going to say it in the streets, and we're going to say it in parliament, and we're going to say it on the television, and we're going to say it on the radio, and we're going to say it online, and we're going to keep saying it until actions are taken which reflect our ideas and our beliefs, our convictions, and the reality that our countries are for our people and our lives do matter. And no more little girls are going to be raped and murdered by foreigners who have no business being here. That's what winning looks like. So, yes, the death of Lola is sad, incredibly sad. I felt tears coming to my eyes reading about the story and seeing her picture, as I've experienced many times over the years reading about the deaths of children all across Europe and the United States at the hands of, in the case of Europe, invaders, in the case of the United States, the black population, which is out of control. But in this case, I also see something that is stirring in the hearts of the French people, and I think it's heartening. It's positive. It's a good thing to see, and I think that people who get frustrated about what are we doing, what is this all for? Are we just screaming into the void, and have we all just become captives of the metaverse? Which are all valid criticisms. They're all valid criticisms. I do think, being trapped online is a danger, is a pitfall. But if what you do online is designed to have an effect in the real world, if, for example, what you do online is spread awareness about the death of Lola and share her name, and if what you do online is even engage with the normies from time to time, obviously don't waste too much of your time arguing online with idiots, but if you do it occasionally, getting our ideas across to people, or even just for those who are watching or who are reading the comments, the exchange, trying to change some minds there, that matters, because that gets translated into the real world. People learn to take off the glasses that have, the veil that has been covering them. They unplug themselves from the matrix slowly by hearing the truth. The truth will set you free. So that is the good that is coming from this. That is the answer to the question, what are we doing? What's it all for? And every individual will have to decide how much time they want to spend online, and what does real world action look like for him or her. But in this case, I do think that the fact that many French people are organizing protest marches to honor and remember Lola and demand justice for her is a astounding occurrence, and it is a victory that came at a cost, but a victory nonetheless. Okay, now I want to get that out of the way, just talk about that briefly, because like I said, her name deserves to be uttered, her name deserves to be remembered. But I actually don't think we're going to be talking too much about current events or doing any sort of more like deep dives into topics on this stream because that really wasn't the intention of mine when I started doing these. It just sort of happened that way because, there was an Italian election, and I figured being half Italian and paying attention to what's going on there, and seeing it as that it was another one of those things, like another real world manifestation of our ideas, our talking points, pushing the Overton window, changing the paradigm. I thought it was worth talking about that. So a few streams ago, we did a whole thing about that. And then, of course, I came across some interesting things that I want to share that was kind of about immigration and the European Union. Or last week we talked about Zionist anti-Semitism, which sounds like an oxymoron, but it's true, it exists. But really, I wanted these streams to be a bit different. Everyone, and their dog pretty much does current events commentary and deep dives into complex themes or history, and they do it really, really well. So I thought I would do something different, something a little bit different, and just do like a sort of cozy stream where people would phone in and we could just talk about, anything really, whatever's on your mind, whatever's, bugging you. And then also we could just sort of regale one another with stories and, sort of just have a good time. Because most of the stuff that happens, as far as current events are concerned, is pretty demoralizing, actually. And I think we can sometimes be exposed too much to bad news. So going forward, and I did a sort of questionnaire to gauge what people would be interested in. I asked if you guys would be interested in having a bit more of a cozy stream, just sort of chatting and sharing stories and reminiscing and that sort of thing. And the response was overwhelmingly positive. That seems like something you guys want. So that's what we're going to do. That was my intention. I kind of forgot about that intention as I got swept up with some current event stuff. But I think we'll go back to doing that. So today, or tonight, wherever you are, I'm going to tell you a story. And this story is going to take us to La France. Speaking of France, as we have been. So I'm going to tell you a story about the time when I was living in France, but didn't really have any set address, didn't have any sort of stability, any place to hang my hat. As the saying goes, home was wherever I hang my hat. I was living out of a backpack, a giant backpack, one of those like hiker's backpacks that it's like, like a meter long and can hold like, just liters and liters of content. And that was pretty much my wardrobe and my my wallet and everything. And I decided to do this thing called woofing, which is basically you volunteer as a farmhand, more or less. And in exchange for your work on a farm, or, I've seen other places where like you could volunteer at a surf school in Galway or things like that. But usually it's farm work. Organic farms also. And in exchange for your service, your volunteer work, you get a bed and food, room and board. And so in that period of my life, I decided, well, this sounds right up my alley. I didn't have much money, and I didn't want to spend my time traipsing around cities and being in hostels all the time. And I wanted to learn things and meet people. And I also wanted to immerse myself in situations where I'd have to speak French, improve my dexterity with the language. So I figured this is a good idea. And so I made a little account and started looking for people who I could work with. And I was in the Aquitaine region of France, very beautiful, very historic. And I ended up staying with an elderly couple named Paul and Genevieve. And they were actually from Belgium, but they had set up a sort of organic farm in the French countryside of Aquitaine. And I stayed with them, and I learned a lot. And I would say that at the very beginning, though, it was a very challenging time because I had just said goodbye to some friends. I would say really acquaintances, the kind of people that you meet when you're traveling. And you don't stay with them very long, but you share such intense experiences with them that a friendship that seems like a very old friendship develops very quickly, and you form deep bonds because of all of the memories and experiences that you shared together. And so I said goodbye to people like that, people who had that sort of impact in my life, knowing that I would probably never see them again. And in most cases, I happened. And I ended up taking a regional train to the nearest train station where Paul would pick me up. And he took me to his farm, and we had a little brief conversation on the car there. And it was all very, very strange, I suppose. But for me, I was kind of used to it by this point, moving around, hitchhiking, being driven in cars with people I had just met, or strangers who had just picked me up off the side of the road. So this was actually becoming rather the norm in my life at that time. But of course, I still had no idea where I was going. I had no idea what to expect, if we were going to get on. And when I arrived, the weather changed and became very English weather. Gray skies, drizzling rain. Sort of felt like someone was spraying you with a sprinkler set on the mist setting the whole time. So you'd be stood outside, and it wasn't really like raining on you. The raindrops weren't falling on you, but you were just being sprayed with this mist. And the longer you stayed outside, the more and more soaking wet your clothes became. And your hair starts falling down, and the big fat drops of rain start falling from the bangs of your hair and into your eyes. So it was a bit miserable. And on that particular day, I had just arrived, was when Paul and Genevieve had to run some errands in the town, in the big city nearby, because we were out in the middle of nowhere country. And so just like in the old days, if you need anything that you can't find on your own land, well, you get in the horse and buggy or the wagon, or nowadays the car, and you go into town. And so they did that. And I remember Paul told me, just make yourself at home. If you get bored, read a book. I said, okay. There wasn't anything to do. They hadn't told me what to do. And, the weather wasn't really providing any sort of assistance. So I was just sat there in the middle of nowhere, completely alone, this misty rain covering the landscapes. And the whole farm was, the farmhouse, all the interior was completely covered in flies. There were flies everywhere. They would crash into the sides of my head. If I took out my laptop, my little laptop that I would use occasionally to send emails to my parents or something, they would smash into the screen of the laptop. If I took out a book, they would smash into the page of the book, walk across the spine of the book, and then go flying into my eyes or something. I remember at one point I was in the bedroom, this little tiny bedroom they'd sort of reserved for me. And there were like 7 flies crawling across the bed, 3 flies whizzing around in circles in the air. And then just random ones would appear and then disappear. And they were also not just annoying me, but they were annoying themselves. there'd be a fly just sort of sat on the bedside table, minding his own business. And then another fly would come behind him and attack him, jump on him from behind. And then, of course, this would cause both flies to go insane, and they'd start whizzing around in circles, crazy, crashing into my head or the book I was reading or the laptop. And there were so many flies because Paul and Genevieve left all their food outside all the time. So whether it was a wedge of cheese, whether it was bowls of fruit cut open or half eaten, they just left everything out, and the windows open as well. So it attracted all these flies. And I remember just taking stock of everything, my wet clothes, everything covered in mud. You know, if you came in the house from the outside, your Wellington boots were covered in mud, your clothes are soaking wet. There's flies everywhere. I just remember feeling very alone, and for the first time in my traveling days, I wondered, have I made a mistake in coming here? Well, things would turn out to be even more interesting, and the doubts would mount more and more. Because within a few weeks of staying on that farm and helping Paul and going into the town market on Sundays in a town called Rouffignac, which if you ever get a chance to go, I recommend it. I recommend staying in this area. It's called the Périgord Vert, the green Périgord. I believe it's green. There are different colors for different parts of this area. I believe this one was the green. And if you ever find yourself in the town of Rouffignac, you will be in a town that I visited every Sunday to help Paul sell his goods at the farmer's market, which was another great experience because I had to interact with the townspeople, and I had to sell the tomatoes and the aubergines and interact with lots of people. And of course, I had to count money, count in French, which if you know a bit of French, you know that numbers can be a bit of a pain in the arse or ass, depending on how you want to call it. You know, if you want to say, for example, 98, in English it's easy enough. In Italian it's easy enough, 98. In Spanish it's easy enough, 98, 98. But in French, it's 98. 4 20s, what is it? 98. 4 20s and 18. And that's how you end up getting 98. But apparently, if you go to other Francophone countries, they have a simplified manner, and it really is just sort of like whatever it would be, so 99, something like that, or 90, something like that, yeah. But in France, they have this more elaborate way of saying things, which does get your mind working, especially if you need to do the maths in your head. So it was great to see all these different people, townspeople buying things, and I have to make change and count and tell them all the different price numbers. Another great learning experience. The best way to learn things is to just dive right in. And so I stayed at the farm for a few weeks, nearly a whole month, and doing that, going to the farmer's market. And one of the days at the farmer's market, I met this little sort of gypsy woman. I call her a gypsy woman, but she wasn't really a gypsy, but she was a tiny old woman. She barely had any teeth. She came up to my shoulder, and I'm not tall. I'm not a very tall person. She came up to my shoulder, and the first time I saw her was at one of these Sundays in the market. And she approached our little stall very slowly because she was saying hello to everyone. She seemed to know everyone, and everyone seemed to know her. And her name was Thérèse, but everyone just called her La Colombe, the dove. They just called her the dove. And I could very shortly after meeting her understand why. She was so full of life. And I hope to say she is. I hope she's still alive. But I'll use the past tense because these events took place in the past. She was so full of life. As she approached our stall, she was, saying hello to everyone, kissing the cheeks of everyone. And she had such a vitality to her that was almost like radiant. This little tiny woman, though, with no teeth. And when she came to our stall, and I introduced myself to her, Paul as well sort of introduced me to her, she almost screamed in delight and did a little dance, and her eyes just became so big, and she was just amazed that someone from so far away had come to this little town and was doing this volunteer work for old Paul the Belgian and his wife Genevieve. She was just so pleased with with meeting a person who was doing this. And what was really nice about her was that she just seemed like, I don't know, she seemed like the typical person who had all of the best elements of the European peoples. Because as I got to know her more, it turns out that she spoke so many different languages, and she had lived all throughout the continent, and you could see that she had sort of assimilated all these different parts of European culture. And so she was really a fantastic specimen of European kind. And so eventually, on the sort of towards the end of the month that I was staying with Paul, he informed me that an Australian couple was going to be staying with us on the farm. And he wasn't sure if there would be enough room and enough resources for everyone to share. So he kind of let me know, you might want to start looking for the next stage of your adventure, of your travels. And this thing tends to happen with Woof. You have usually people will offer their services for a sort of set time limit. This is to avoid, I guess, exploitation and things like that. If I recall correctly, Paul and I had never really arranged on it. We just sort of said, okay, like a month, we'll see what happens, but let's start off with a month. And then over the course of that month, Paul, was must have received another notification from an Australian couple who wanted to also stay with him. So the Australian couple arrived. They arrived on a Saturday, and they wanted to come with us to the market on Sunday. And I sort of knew that this would probably be the last day that I spent with Paul and his family, and then I'd have to find somewhere else to go. And so before that Sunday to the market, the previous Sunday, I had spoken with the dove, and she was so effusive. And she said, you know what, don't worry. We're coming to the end of the month. If you can't stay with Paul anymore, come stay with me. And I described her as a gypsy, but she wasn't gypsy. She was a native French woman, but she just had this sort of, vagabond, almost sort of savage nature to her. She was not an urbanite in any respect. She was very, well, the way she said it herself, when I would speak with her and sort of just be amazed at her vitality, well, she said, I am alive. And she would do a little dance, a little pirouette, click her heels, strike a pose. She was like someone like a character out of a storybook. And so on one of the penultimate days of my time with Paul, one of the penultimate day at the market, we sort of were talking, and I think Paul was a bit sad to see me go, but he couldn't accommodate 3 people. And so he kind of let on that, he might have to go find somewhere else to stay. And so the dove was very keen that I come stay with her. And she said, you can come and do the exact same thing with me. Help me in my garden. I've got land. Come over, stay with me, same arrangement. You help me on my land, I'll give you a bed to sleep in and food to eat. I said, grand, okay. So we come to the last Sunday. She's given me her phone number. We had this conversation, sort of made some arrangements, said goodbye with 3 kisses on the cheek, because in that part of France, they do 3 kisses. And so as I headed to the town market of Rouffignac, I was pretty confident that things were going to be okay. And I would land on my feet. I'd be whisked away to another farm, but pretty much staying in the same province. I might even see Paul and Genevieve at the Sunday market again, and I'll just stay another month doing this kind of thing and living day by day. That was my mentality at this time. Really wasn't having any sort of long-term future plans. So we go to the market again, and now I'm pretty sure that this is going to be my last day with Paul. And so I'm doing the usual work, and we had arranged that this Madame Dove would sort of collect me at the end of the day of selling and buying at the market. And so as the time comes to close up shop, take down the stalls, load up the truck, the Dove comes dancing into the town square where the market is held. And I can see her, I can hear off in the distance that she's arriving, because she's just so effusive and everyone's so happy to see her. The charisma of this woman is off the charts. And so she danced and sang her way to our stall, and she stood before me and started speaking to me in Italian. And she said to me in Italian, "I completely forgot about you." And I sort of looked at her like, cosa? What? And she said, "Yes, I completely forgot about you. You know, my old head, things just go in one ear and out the other. I'm an old lady. What can I say? I forgot about you. And also, what was I thinking? It's not possible for you to stay with me. I don't have enough food for you." So I didn't know how to respond to this. Suddenly, I'm realizing, it looks like I'm not going to land on my feet this time, which I must say, I usually did have the luck to land on my feet throughout these years of backpacking around and traveling around. If you put yourself out there in the universe, if you think positively and are willing to adapt and embrace challenges instead of wallowing in uncertainty or fear or procrastination, you'll find that you actually do usually land on your feet. And even situations that you think are bad turn out to be quite good, actually. But in this particular moment, I couldn't see it. I had been rendered homeless in the space of 5 sentences. And being homeless was the one thing I really wanted to avoid. Anything else, okay. Working on a farm, hitchhiking across country, okay, I'll do that, but I don't want to be homeless. Well, now that had just become reality. So I stood there, laughed sort of sheepishly, and my mind accelerated into a sort of hyper speed as I tried to figure out, well, what would be my next step? And the 2 Australians, the Australian couple who were with me at the market, they were sort of looking on, and they didn't speak Italian or French, so they really had no idea what was going on. And they're asking me, well, what just happened? And so I had to explain to them the whole story about my arrangement with the Dove and how this arrangement had just fallen through the cracks. And that this odd bohemian woman who had offered me a place to stay and a place to work had now just said, not going to happen. And this Australian couple, they were already amused by my lifestyle, which I admit is kind of bizarre. And now they were seeing up close and personal just how bizarre it could be. So I was glad to actually have some witnesses for a change, because many times in my travels and the experiences that I went through, I was often by myself. And, if it wasn't for writing down a few pages in a journal or recounting the story in an email to my folks back home, back in the States, there was nobody there to remember these things. But this time I had an audience. And so I was glad to be able to say, well, here's this. I'm not making this up. These sort of extraordinary things do happen. And things were about to get even more extraordinary. Because the dove started even apologizing to Paul. Because Paul was a very lovely elderly gentleman. He didn't want to see me sort of, abandoned in the French countryside. And he started feeling, I think, a little bit of sadness was even written on his face. He sort of seemed concerned, certainly. And this was many years ago. This was almost 10 years ago. So I'm just, in my early 20s. To his eyes, I'm still a child. And so the dove is even apologizing to Paul. But, the arrangements have been made. There's not enough room on his farm for 3 people. The Australian couple has arrived. There's nothing else for it. So the dove comes back to me, and she insists that I at least come to her house for lunch. And the Australian couple is basically following me around as I'm loading up the crates and all the unsold produce, loading it up into Paul's truck. And they're asking, well, what are you going to do now? What are you going to do now? And I have no idea what I'm going to do now. So I just said, well, I'm going to have lunch with the dove, as if that was something I did every Sunday and it was the most normal thing in the world. What do you mean what I'm going to do now? I'm obviously going to go have lunch with the dove. And beyond that, of course, I couldn't say anything because I literally had no idea what would happen after that lunchtime. And so Paul told me that I could come back to his house and he and his wife would try and arrange a room for me. I think he was really feeling quite sad about the whole thing, and perhaps even guilty, I might say. But I said, no, it's fine. I'll contact some people I know in other parts of France. I'll hitchhike to their neck of the country, crash with them, find a job somewhere else. It'll be fine. Don't worry. I didn't want him to feel bad at all because he was such a lovely host. He didn't need to feel bad on my account. So then the dove's daughter, who I had also met previously, she approached me, and she also offered some sort of consolation and gave almost like an embarrassed explanation, sort of like, look, I heard about what happened. I had no idea that my mother had offered you our place to stay and, offered you a job working on our land. I had no idea that she'd even done that. And of course, she is a sort of flighty old woman. And, I'm sorry, it's a bit embarrassing. I hope everything works out for you. And even then she gave me her number and said, I'll never forget what she said. She said, my husband and I also have a little farm. You can come and visit us anytime. And you can see our goats. She said, we have goats. You can come and take care of our goats and see our goats. And I hear you're having lunch with my mother. So why don't you come to my house afterwards? And if my mother can't drive you, you can just hitchhike. Because I don't live far from her, but I don't have a car, so I can't pick you up. But I don't live far from her land, so you can just hitchhike over to my farm. And I just remember thinking, how lovely it was that they spoke about hitchhiking as if it was very matter of fact. It was just, the most normal thing. Okay, there's just hitchhike. Which I also didn't even really register as something abnormal because I'd already been doing it so much, especially in France. In France, hitchhiking isn't illegal, and you can certainly do it in the deep country. And lots of people do hitchhike in the deep country just to get around. I don't have a car. Well, I'll hitchhike. And pretty much everyone knows everyone else in these small areas. So you're probably going to get picked up by someone that you might even be related to, some distant cousin or someone that you might have known from the other local town. So yeah, she just sort of said matter-of-factly, well, when you finish having lunch with my mother, if you want to come over to my farm, just hitchhike and we'll be waiting for you. And so I said, thank you very much. That sounds great. We'll see what happens. Then the time passed by and, we finished loading the truck and the Australians kept asking me, well, why, Mike, what's going on? And I told them, I've just been invited to another farm, but if I need to get there, I'll hitchhike. And they completely did not understand. They were completely confused. They had no idea how is this even possible. For them, everything is was very well arranged. They had their nice North Face apparel and their hipster beanie caps and everything. Everything was very nice, and they're wearing their Converse trainers. Meanwhile, I had my hair growing long, almost down to my shoulders. Beard was all mangy. I was just totally embracing a sort of vagabond, savage lifestyle. And here I was, sort of walking a tightrope between being completely homeless and we'll see what happens in the next 24 hours. Not even that, 24 hours. We'll see what happens in the next 5 hours. So I just told them, well, I'm going to Dove's house for lunch, but I'm not going to be able to stay there. Then I might hitchhike to somewhere else, and we'll see what happens there. And it was all just happening very, very quickly. And as I was loading the last crate, some minutes had passed. I think maybe half an hour passed. The whole farmer's market was closing down now, and the dove sort of magically appears right next to me as I'm loading up the last crates into Paul's truck. But this time, she wasn't alone. There was a young man standing next to her. And the dove says to me, I found someone you can stay with. This is Sebastian. He needs a woofer. You can go with him. And she sort of announced these things with such happiness and matter-of-factness. Look, I found someone. You can go with him. Everything's going to be fine. I had no idea who this man was. I'd never seen him at the market before. I had no idea. And he had never seen me. And so I said, I looked at him. I even asked, because now I need some stability. Now I need some certainty. I said, are you sure? Are you sure you really need someone to, do volunteer work on your land in exchange for giving him a place to stay for a while? Are you sure? And he just sort of laughed and winked at me. He's like, yeah, why not? So I'll see you soon. And so we shook hands, and then Madame Dove took me by the hand, and she pressed my hand and said that now you need to come and have lunch with me. And after we have lunch, I'll take you to Sebastian's land, his farm. And then she gave me a kiss on the cheek and did a little dance and whisked herself away magically into the groups of people who were still mingling in the town square. So the Australians come up to me and say, okay, well, what's happened now? And I said, now I'm going to Sebastian's house. I really didn't know how to answer these questions. It was just, this is what's happening. I'm going to have lunch with this woman called the Dove, and then I'm going to go live with Sebastian. Any questions? I don't have anything else to say. This is what's happening. And so they kind of laughed and were like, well, okay, good luck with that. Hope everything works out. Because, they knew that in a moment we'd all be saying goodbye to, and I'll never see them again. And sure enough, that's what happened. The last of the carts and crates were loaded up on the truck. Paul came by with the keys, and the Australians and Paul got into the truck, and we said our last goodbyes, and then they drove off. And as the truck disappeared in the distance, I realized that the entire town square of Ruffinghack was now completely empty. Everyone had gone home. Everyone had gone home to have lunch, or they had popped into the little local cafes. And I was completely alone in this town square. It was like something out of an old Western film where you see the tumbleweed roll across the empty streets. There was nobody there, and it was so quiet. Suddenly everything just went quiet. And it was in this moment that I was able to really let it all sink in. And I realized that I had just gone from basically being completely homeless with nowhere to go and really no plan, and I have really very little money as well. So I'm looking at total uncertainty even as to how am I going to get my next meal, to sort of being rescued from that situation by a random guy named Sebastian, who I'd never met before. So I stood there and rolled myself a cigarette because this was back in the time where I smoked. But I will say that this particular moment, the nicotine was necessary. So let's skip ahead. I hear my name being called, and it's the dove calling me into this sort of this little cafe area, and she's calling me in Italian. She loves speaking Italian. When she found out that I was Italian, we just spoke Italian, and so she's shouting, "Dai, vieni qui, vieni qui." So I crossed the road and I entered this little sort of shop, and it was full of pottery and earthenware, and there was like handmade ponchos and straw hats hung on the walls. And the dove was sitting at this round table, and she was accompanied by this giant of a man, huge person, huge man, who was carving a piece of wood. And then next to him were two other people who were kind of, I don't know if this was their real clothes. They were kind of dressed like country bumpkins, as if they'd been cast as extras in some sort of, bucolic scene as the Country Bumpkin 1 and Country Bumpkin 2. And they were sat at this table, and the giant stands up and introduces himself, and he says he's from New York, but his family has French origins, and this shop used to be his parents' holiday house, but now he was sort of maintaining it and selling sort of, country folk apparel and artisanal handmade goods, such as these earthenware pots and pans. And he had such a deep, booming voice. Everything he said sounded like a town crier's announcement. Even just, "Hello, my name is, and I'm from New York." It sounded just like he was making these booming proclamations. And so then he invited me to sit down, and it was like being in the company of bohemians. They started eating Colombian-style soup, and the dove started to play a piano that I hadn't even noticed was there. Suddenly there's a piano in the middle of this area, and the dove is banging out some tune. And the country bumpkins stood up and started clapping and whooping and hollering and dancing as the dove played some sort of vaudeville-sounding song on this piano. And the conversation with the giant and some other people at the table shifted. They were talking about a piece of wood that was in the giant's hand, and it was the center of their conversation. And from what I gathered, it was a really interesting type of wood that gave off a certain kind of smoke and flame. And I asked, well, what do you use this wood for? Do you cook with it or something? And he says, no, you can't cook with this. It's sacred wood, man. That's what he said. And then he says, "Come here, smell it." And he offered me a piece of the wood to smell in it. Then he lit it, and he sort of let the wisp of smoke fill the air. And then I realized that these were the local Buddhists that Paul had told me about, that there was a community of Buddhists who lived, French Buddhists who lived in this area. And so I realized, okay, I've just met the Buddhists with their sacred wood and their sort of Colombian soup and earthen pottery, and they've got this sort of meditation seance thing going on with their sacred wood. And I was just sort of taking it all in, and then I saw that the New York giant took the sacred wood and brought it behind his neck towards his back and started scratching his back with it, which made me wonder just how sacred that wood was after all. But, if that's what you have and your back is itchy, you got to use it. And they kept feeding me all this stuff. They gave me later some sort of food that had like rice and beans mixed with coriander. And then they gave me a dessert of melons soaked with sugar and all their juices, forming this little sort of like almost like a melted sorbet. And it was all very lovely. Everything was homemade. Everything tasted great. And so then the dove got up and said, "Well, now it's time to go have lunch." So we got into a car, and we're sort of talking about things, and I come to realize that, this woman is also half mad, because she is blasting sort of like Yugoslavian gypsy music off on the stereo and whizzing through roundabouts. Instead of like going around them, she would go over them. The roundabouts were low enough. There wasn't any sort of like direct decoration or road signs in the middle. So she could just sort of, instead of wasting her time following the road and going around the roundabout, why not just go through it? Just go over it. And so that's what we did. Well, that's what she did. She just went straight over the roundabouts. And we get to her house, and she's got, it's basically, if I remember as well, it's sort of like it was, you walked in, there was a little porch area, but then it was also kind of open. Everything was very open. Even it seemed like the ceiling was open. And in the back, there was this massive garden, peppers and tomatoes and carrots, very green, everything growing quite nicely. So she immediately took me to the garden to show me, this is what you could have been working on if it was a way for you to have stayed here. This is what you'd be working on, tending to this garden. And she's showing me everything. And so then we go back inside to prepare lunch, and we're talking in her kitchen, and she just started regaling me with all these stories from her life. And I wonder, she seemed very sociable, but I wonder how many opportunities she has to recount her life story. Everyone already knows her. And so now she had a new person, a new audience that she could tell her stories to. And many of them were great. We started talking about Italian films and the French New Wave films. And she started telling me all about her favorite films and how she met, I think it was Godard. She met Godard, or she was in one of Godard's films or something. I can't remember exactly what, but it was, my French again was a bit of, not perfect, but I remember being taken aback, like amazed. Wow. You met Godard, you were in a film of his. And then she even told me that she used to be a stage actress in Greece. She used to live in Paris. When she was a young girl, she would spend her summers in Russia. She learned 6 languages. She was just an amazing person. And, even though we had a very humble lunch, there wasn't a lot of food prepared. The lunch itself lasted for hours because we just sat there talking the whole time. But of course, all good things come to an end. And my time with her had reached its conclusion as the evening was drawing on. And so we got back in the car, and on came the Yugoslavian gypsy music. She put the pedal to the metal, and we flew over the roundabouts, going, I had no idea where. At one point, I saw a sign that sort of denoted that we had entered the town of Plazak. But then 5 seconds later, I saw another sign with the word Plazak crossed out with a red bar, which means you're now leaving Plazak. So in 5 seconds, we'd entered this town and left it. So I had no idea where we were. I had no no concept of location. So then, after taking some forest roads that twisted and turned, we came upon Sebastian's farm. Remember, this is an area of agriculturists, artisans, farmers. This is deep country. And so we exit the car and walk onto Seb's land, and he meets us halfway, invites us in to where he lives. And where he lives is basically a garage, a long sort of warehouse, a long sort of tool shed, rather, a long tool shed. And at the end of the tool shed was where he had made a little sitting room with a kitchenette and a television. And that's also where he had made a little bedroom, kind of divided with a curtain. And that's where he and his wife and his little son made their home. And so we're sat in this kind of makeshift kitchen at the end of a tool shed, a long tool shed. And we're drinking tea, and we're just sort of talking about the bizarre circumstances of how someone like me has arrived here. And the dove seemed to have realized that she put me in a bit of a bind, and it was a miracle that she had found Sebastian, and it was a miracle that Sebastian had been wanting someone like a woofer to come and help him out. He had lots of work to do. He had lots of ambitions. He used to be a chemist in Paris who had grown tired of living in Paris and wanted to basically homestead. And he ended up doing it. He took his family from the city of Paris. He left the urban wildlife areas and managed to go out into the deep country and started a homestead. But it was really hard for him to get anyone to stay and help. He had to do it all by himself. And he explained, I always remember how he was just, again, so matter of fact about it. He said, no one wants to come here because I don't have a shower or a bathroom. And I'm just sitting there sipping tea, taking this all in, wondering, now where am I? I'm in a place that has no shower, no bathroom. Well, that's interesting. Okay, well, not much else I can do to change the situation, so let's just roll with it. Okay, no shower, no bathroom. I'm sure there'll be some sort of remedy to that situation, but let's just keep my mouth shut and don't worry about it. Just don't worry about it. Is it the worst thing in the world to not have a modern shower and a modern toilet, not to have these amenities? Of course not. And that's another thing that's really interesting about being a human and how adaptable we are. Once you spend a few days without modern conveniences, if you have the right mindset, if you're not completely dependent on those conveniences, if you don't mind getting your hands dirty and lots of other body parts dirty, you don't really need these things. You won't miss them. And the alternatives aren't that bad anyway. So I sat there, not too perturbed, but just a bit amused, that now I am here in the middle of the, big sky, rolling hills, French countryside, staying with someone who I've just met, and he doesn't have a shower or a bathroom. All right. I just hope that my face didn't betray any sort of horrified expression. So the dove finished her tea, and there was really nothing much left to say. So she left. And I would see her again occasionally because Sebastian and the dove were friends, and the dove was ostensibly an important member of this community. And so occasionally she would pop by the farm and say hello to Sebastian and say hello to me. So I did see her on a few more occasions, but not that many, unfortunately. And so then Sebastian showed me around my new home. And I would not be staying in the little sort of living room area / kitchen / bedroom that he had created out of the end of this warehouse. No, my living quarters were outside. And it was an authentic Mongolian yurt. That's where I stayed for the about 2.5 months that I stayed with Sebastian. My living quarters were a yurt. Really, just a complete replica, really, really well made Mongolian style yurt that had a little cast iron stove on the inside. And it was actually, it was not divided into any rooms or anything. It was just, you enter the yurt and there it is. There's a bed. And regarding the shower situation, there was indeed no shower. But there was a toilet. He kind of, he made he sold it poorly, Sebastian. He did have a toilet. The toilet was, again, sort of out back behind the corner of the warehouse. And it was a little cube-shaped plastic container. And you would shit in it. And then next to this, in this area, sort of behind the corner of the warehouse, was a bunch of sawdust. Tons of it, really. And when you finished shitting into this sort of plastic cube, you would just throw sawdust on your shit. And that was how we defecated. That was how we took care of our fecal matter. There would be occasions where the cube container was quite full, and you'd sort of lift the sort of tarp covering and you'd see all these little like sausage rolls of poo stacked on top of the sawdust, and the sawdust getting higher and higher and higher to the point where when you sat down, you were really risking getting a little brown kiss from one of the turds right just below the skin of your ass. And that's when you would realize, okay, it's time to take this and change it. Luckily, I say luckily, maybe it would have been nice to know what exactly had to be done. Sebastian never asked me to clear out the poo bucket. That was something he reserved for himself as the host. I think probably, yeah, I suppose he's maybe been a bit embarrassed if I had to be the one to do it, considering that also that was where his wife and son did their business as well. I don't know, but he never asked me to take care of it. So I actually don't know what he did. Probably, there was probably some manner of disposing of it correctly. But we were in the middle of nowhere. It was just massive green hills, this huge forest where we would walk into the forest to forage for mushrooms, or just spend, you know, after work was done, spend the day in nature exploring, or, you know, going into to look for fallen trees that we could use for firewood, because firewood would actually be essential. One of the last things that Seb told me on that first day before we sort of like went off to bed was it can get cold inside the yurt, and you'll need to chop some wood for a fire. And so that's what I did. He handed me an axe, and I just went to the forest and started gathering some branches and logs and took them back. And there's nothing like chopping firewood. It is one of the most pleasing physical activities, at least in my opinion. When you split the wood in a single stroke, it's just so pleasing. And that's what I did for like the first few moments of my stay before going to bed, was just chopping up a bunch of firewood that I would later use in that cast iron stove to heat my yurt. And the next day, I will say, I'll end the story just by saying what we did the next day. So basically, the first official thing I did to help on this guy's farm was going into his garden of marijuana plants and doing a little bit of the weed harvest, as it were. It was the first thing we did. Not, you know, harvesting the tomatoes as we were coming into early autumn, you know, not cleaning up the greenhouses or anything like that. No, we went in, and he took me to an area just over some of the hills and said, this is what we're going to harvest first. Let's take these, I guess, branches of marijuana bushes. And we just sort of collected them and tied them into bundles. And we brought them back to the house at the end of the warehouse, set them on the what passed as like the kitchen table. And basically, I spent the first part of my day working for him. He and I sat at that table, picking off the buds of these branches. I don't know anything about marijuana. I don't really smoke it. It's not my thing. But he seemed to be a fan of it. So that's what we did first. And it was great working there. It was totally, again, you know, people wonder what life was like back in the past, or, you know, is it difficult? Is it hard? And I sometimes say, you know, it depends on the season. It depends where you are. But oftentimes working in the country isn't as horrifying as, you know, the moderns make it out to be. Many times we'd be finished at midday, and we'd spend the rest of the afternoon drinking pastis, getting drunk off this French liqueur. They would smoke their joints. Sebastian and whatever, you know, friends were helping him on his little farm. And, you know, we would just lie in the grass, take the sun. I would teach English to his little boy. We'd play around with the dog. And then, you know, if there was anything left to do, okay, we'd take care of it on our time if there was nothing pressing. And then the next day, okay, we'd take care of the important stuff, get it done as fast as possible. But there was no one telling us at what time we had to be done. There was no one telling us what to do, where to go. The concept of time was actually kind of lost. And we were so far removed from society that Sebastian actually built a house, and I helped him build it, which is something I'd never done, knew nothing about. But again, you know, you have to adapt. learn by doing it. And I don't think he asked for permission to build that house. I don't think he had a permit or anything. He just, look, I live here. I've set up my homestead here, but I can't keep living at the end of the warehouse. I need to build a home. And so he did. But as to my knowledge, it was just sort of like, and many other houses around the area were like that. People were just building a house on their side of the hill. And so it was total freedom, total independence. And I really loved it. Angriff says, Sebastian is now the largest weed farmer in Aquitaine. Maybe. Unfortunately, after I spent a few months with him, I moved to the city of Bordeaux, and I never have seen anyone from there again. I've never seen the Dove again. I've never seen Sebastian again. I met some people in the local town. I met some people, some of the other community of Buddhists. We went to go see the local Buddhist temple that was sort of on the other side of the hills. And I met some people there. And this was back in the day, you know, I would stay in contact with people through email. I just give them my email address and they'd give me theirs. And I exchanged some emails with people that I met there for quite some time after I left. But eventually, you know, with the passing of time, you lose contact with people. So I don't know how he is. His son, who was a toddler, a really, really small, like very small, maybe 4 years old, he would be, man, my goodness, he'd be in his late teens now, I think, or mid-teens perhaps. So many years have passed. I hope he's all right, though. I do hope he's all right. And that is the story of how I befriended, stayed, and worked with a bunch of French Buddhist bohemians in the middle of nowhere. I hope you enjoyed this story. And my best bet, Orthodoxy Proxy says, my best bet is the Dove, the Belgian, and Sebastian. We're all figments of Pox's massive weed bender. You know what? Maybe not from the weed, but probably from the absinthe and the pastis. We definitely consumed enough of that to have some benders. But really, not quite, because it was we weren't downing the pastis, you know, we weren't downing the liqueur. We would just drink it calmly and casually at the little picnic table, sort of set up in the grassy fields, and there was no pressure. There was no need to get drunk and do anything crazy. It was more like, we finished work, let's have a relaxing sip of liqueur, and then just sort of fall asleep in the sun, or, you know, back in the yurt. All right, so now let's just chat with you guys for the next half an hour or so. Feel free to phone in, or if you prefer to comment in the live chat, that's another option. And you can also send super chats to Entropy if you want to do so. Let me go check and see if there's anything there. Although I don't know if my internet connection is going to be good enough to run Telegram and Entropy at the same time. And this is basically how these streams are going to be for the next couple of weeks. We're just going to tell stories. I've got at least, I think, 10 stories that I think you will enjoy from different places of Europe. And this is another thing that I wanted to do, is just tell stories about our countries, our nations, our traditions. I've got stories of different festivals, stories of different peoples. So I think you will enjoy that. And it's good to tell stories. It's good to tell oral stories in particular, like our ancestors used to do in the old days. Yeah, it doesn't look like, I don't know why, but today my internet is not cooperating. And okay, as I was just explaining, my internet today has been very bad, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to multitask. And as just as I was explaining that, I believe I lost connection. So I'm not going to be able to open the Entropy. So if anyone is sending super chats there, I will see them at a later hour and hopefully get to them, read them out on the next stream. So let's just keep it then to the call-in and the live chat. How are you guys doing? What's on your minds? And if you got any stories of your own that you'd like to share, feel free. Feel free. I'm kind of also inspired to do this, to do these sort of story streams. And maybe that'll be the name of them. Instead of the Thursday Telegram stream, it'll be the story streams. Because of what I saw out of Ireland last week, a Shanachie named Eddie Linehan was lamenting the fact that he has hundreds and hundreds of hours of recorded stories. The stories of the people of Ireland, people from the past. He mentions that he has a recording of someone who fought in the First World War and the Boer War. Just imagine this, listening to someone like that's not just from another time. That's pretty much another world to hear someone who fought in those wars. And he's got recordings of conversations with people like that. And just hours more. And no one in Ireland is interested in it. Not one Irish institution is interested. No one's interested in giving him a grant. No one's interested in taking those recordings and maintaining them, preserving them, showcasing them. And so ultimately, the only organization that was interested is some Irish American institution over in the States who are happy to take those recordings and give him a fair due for them and in exchange maintain and protect them and preserve them. And it was such a shame. And then as I read more, it was an article in the Irish Independent, and then as I paid more attention to that story and then saw that other people had picked up on it, turns out that he has a YouTube channel, and he tells stories on his YouTube channel. I would share a link to it, but again, I'm afraid to multitask with my internet connection being as unstable as it is. Let's see, maybe it's just the Entropy website. Maybe if I type in YouTube, well, would you look at that? Yeah, YouTube is fine. Well, let me just see then here. Yep, the Tell Me a Story podcast with Eddie Linehan. I'm going to go ahead and share this in the chat so you guys can see. I did share some one of his story hours last week. And so just listening to his little podcast, I guess we call it now, but it was really just him doing what a Shanachie does, and telling stories about Ireland, just on new media. But it kind of helped me remember what were my intentions with these live streams, and that's why I was like, oh, that's kind of what I wanted to do too. So I think that is what we're gonna do here. Okay. I'll share his latest Animals in Irish Folklore, Part 2. Yeah, Nick says that he can't access entropy either, so I guess it is something with entropy. All right, there he is. The Tell Me a Story podcast with Eddie Linehan. All right. Orthodoxy Proxy asked, did you have a chance to visit Avignon during your days backpacking in the south of France? Yes, I did. In fact, I spent a lot of time in Provence. One of my workmates was French Polish, half French. And when our sort of, we were doing just like contract work, contract work. We were hitmen. So anyway, when our sort of contract ran up, we just headed south. And apparently he had studied in Avignon. Well, apparently he had studied in Avignon. And so we went to Avignon because it was sort of like his old stomping grounds. He was very nostalgic for that place. He had some friends there from his student days. And so, yeah, we went there. We stayed in lots of different places in Provence. We went to Aix-en-Provence, which is a really interesting place. We went to Nîmes, Orange. I believe it's Nîmes that has a very, if I recall correctly, Nîmes has a very well-preserved Roman amphitheater where the French still practice bullfighting. They still stage bullfights there. And it's also the place where Van Gogh painted the Yellow Cafe, and it still exists. So you can even go in and see what he saw and what he painted. What's funny about it is that, you know, it's such a famous painting, and the place, I believe it's, you know, the actual location. It's not a replica or anything like that, but it's not full of tourists. It's not a tourist trap. It's not a tourist attraction. It's really actually just like any other place, and people don't make a big deal of it. You know, it's like, yeah, okay, one of the most famous depictions of a painting is right here. We're just gonna, you know, sip our cafe like it's no big deal. It's not there's not, you know, hordes of Asians taking pictures outside of it or something like that. And then in Avignon, we stayed for a few days with some of his friends from his student years, and it's fantastic. I love Avignon, absolutely beautiful place. And it used to be the seat of the papacy, so there's this huge Gothic cathedral, and it's really stunning. And Provence, then, just as a whole, the region as a whole is fantastic. Lavender fields, warm weather. And while we were staying there, I also got to experience the Mistral. And I mentioned this in the stream I did the other day talking about chemtrails. But the Mistral is this really powerful cold wind that gathers in the Pyrenees and then gusts its way through the country down south, down to Provence. And it's like really, really powerful winds. Like the winds are so strong, it feels like they're going to rip the clothes off of your body. And it's really cold as well, frigidly cold winds. And so you get this curious concoction of cold wind, but summer sunny skies. We were there in the summer, and the Mistral struck. And, you know, we're out in, you know, a t-shirt or, you know, like a light linen, you know, buttoned up shirt, and, you know, expecting, you know, just another sunny summer day in the south of France. And then here comes the Mistral, and it's just gale force, frigid, cold winds. It's almost, if you walk against it, you really have to every step is like forceful. You have to really put your head down and grunt your way if you're going against the wind. Yeah, Reed Johnson has just published a little link to the Wikipedia describing it. The winds, it produces sustained winds often exceeding 66 kilometers an hour or 41 miles per hour, sometimes reaching 185 kilometers an hour or 115 miles per hour. Yeah, so pretty powerful stuff. But I was glad to have experienced it. It's just one of those things, you know, like those are the Mistral is part of the, I believe it's part of the 7 winds. And there's some other ones as well. And they all have different names, like in Italian, they have the names in Italian. And yeah, there's the Mistral. Tramontana, yep. Tramontane, that's the northern wind. Gregale, Libeccio, Ponente, Ostro. Yeah, so these are like the winds of the Mediterranean. And, you know, if you always just stay in the big cities or whatever, you don't really get to experience these things. But we were lucky enough to, and I say lucky because it was quite an experience to to feel the Mistral blowing at your face. We were in the countryside when that happened. All right, let's check and see if anyone wants to phone in. Doesn't look like anyone yet, so that's fine. All right, any other questions or comments? We can talk about current stuff if you want. If not, then we're coming up to 10:30, so it'll be another nice exact 2-hour stream, just the way I like it. Just one more check on the listening in. Don't see anyone asking to be unmuted, so all right, guys. Looks like we have come to the end. I'll give a few more minutes. I see some people typing, so I'll give a few more moments. Orthodoxy Proxy asks, what did you enjoy best about Provence? Oh, man. Going well along memory lane here. I really liked being in Avignon. I don't usually like cities. But at that particular time in my life too, I did enjoy cities a bit more. Like I said, cities weren't so disgusting to me. Living in Bordeaux really changed the way I looked at cities, because that had a lot of like no-go zones areas and things like that. And also my life was very difficult there. And of course, having grown up in the sort of Chicago metropolis, I always had a side of me that didn't like cities, but then another part of me really, really does, especially, the European cities that are historic, well-preserved, convivial, comfortable, aesthetically pleasing. And Avignon is exactly like that. Avignon, I haven't been there in a long time, 10 years, I think, over 10 years. So I don't know if it's fallen into decay. I don't know. I hope not. But it is, when I was there, it was well preserved, well taken care of, and it was so lovely. So I really just liked wandering around Avignon. I really just liked, whenever I go somewhere, and particularly in these days of traveling out of a backpack and being quite free to do whatever I wanted, I would, if I saw, for example, a narrow, winding cobblestone streets in the old town, I would just turn and walk down it to see where it led, or just to walk down a street that I knew was very old, and that millions of people had walked on over the centuries, and just touch the stone buildings of the walls of the buildings as other people had. Just breathe in that ambiance and that history and that sense of location and place, and I would even say belonging. I'm not French, but I spent a long time in France, and I really immersed myself in France. And in a way, I was almost reborn, or perhaps I became a man in France through all the things that I lived through. And so really, that was just one of the things I love to do. Then the friend that I was with, sometimes we were together, and then other days we just go off and do our own things. We ate at like a fondue restaurant one night, and it was really good. And the waitress who served us was gorgeous, just one of the most beautiful women I've ever seen. And I could barely take my eyes off her, and she could tell. I don't think she was like, I was going to say, I don't think she was pleased, but that's a lie, because I remember her flirting. We made eye contact a lot and were very flirtatious. But I couldn't hide it. It's just like this woman, the clothes she was wearing, the way she carried herself. The French are truly fantastic people. I understand why people don't like the French and have certain perceptions about the French. But if you get to know them, and if you focus on their positive characteristics, And of course, there are differences. I spent quite some time in the north of France, in Normandy as well. Um, and the difference between the French in the north and the difference, the French in the south and the French in the cities. Okay, there are significant differences. Probably not as acute as the difference between northern Italians and Napolitani, or Andalusians and Asturians, but even in France, the differences are pretty substantial, I suppose. But in general, if I had to generalize about all the French, I would say yes, they have their frustrating qualities, their chauvinistic qualities, or whatever you want to say, stereotypically, negative French stereotypes. But at the same time, they also have a really just a unique demeanor. The way they look at life is very philosophical at times. And even just learning the language French, you learn things about life. There are certain things in French expressions, or the way that French grammar is constructed, that kind of give you a new perspective on things. It's like, oh, I didn't know that. I didn't see it that way until I had to describe it in French. What else did I enjoy about Provence, or about Avignon? Okay, Provence in general. Oh, just even just taking the train from like one town to the other and just seeing the landscapes pass by. It really is, postcard picturesque. The purple fields of lavender really do exist. They aren't just on the postcards. They really do exist, and they're everywhere. And I remember one time I was just sat on the train looking out the window as the sun was setting on my side of the train, and just the way it was painting the sky, burning orange, red orange, and flushes of pink and purple. And then right below it, just this vast sea of lavender fields kind of gently swaying in the wind. It was just remarkable. This is, we have a beautiful continent here. Our countries are beautiful. Our lands are beautiful. Our people are beautiful. We have all the diversity we need. And to see it being spoiled by invaders and traitors and usurpers is really tragic. But hopefully it won't continue much longer, and whatever damage has been done can be undone, but it will take a long time. Did you walk along the Pont Saint-Benizet? Is that the bridge that is incomplete? It must be. I believe there's even a song about it. I got a lot of memories are going back. There's even a song. I don't remember exactly the tune, but there's a song, a folk song about this bridge. Yes, I did. I did walk along it. A very curious bridge that just sort of ends in the middle of the river that it's going over, which would be the Rhône, right? I believe it's the Rhône. Yeah, so we did walk along that. I should go and look and see what is the story behind that bridge. I remember as I was there, we learned about the bridge. Actually, the friend I was with, who was half French, told me about the history of the bridge and how we must walk along. And he even taught me the song. But of course, I forgot over the years, unfortunately. But I will have to go back and learn that song. I'll see if it's on YouTube or something. Another thing we did one day in Avignon, a really hot day. We popped inside just to enjoy the air conditioning. We popped inside a cinema, and there were two films playing. We just decided to stay for the double feature, basically. And we watched a biopic about the Doors, narrated by Johnny Depp. So that was interesting. And then the next feature was I think it was a Portuguese film. It was Portuguese with subtitles in French, because I remember not being totally able to follow everything that was going on. And I've tried to find out what was the name of this film. I've tried to type in the plot of this film, and to this day I still can't. I don't think I've gotten the correct result. But the premise of the film, it was really interesting. It was being told backwards, and the person the person narrating the story at the beginning sort of has the camera close up in on his face. And every time it would cut back to that scene, the camera would be pulling farther away, little by little, as he's recounting the events of this film. And I don't really remember anything that happens in the film, but there's this big fat prostitute, And there's a moment in the film. He's a chef at some point. It's a reveal that he was a cook or a chef, and at one point he goes on this diatribe, this screed about how gorgonzola is the king of all cheeses, is the greatest cheese, and he uses it in this recipe. And then ultimately, like, the big payoff of the film is that he murders this big fat prostitute and cuts a chunk out of her ass cheek and cooks it and eats it with like a gorgonzola sauce. And then as the camera cuts back to him, his face, as it's been pulling farther away slowly, it's revealed that he's in the middle of a jail cell and he's telling the story to his other cellmates. And then the film just ends. So I remember we were tired. It was a hot day. We were just in the cinema to enjoy the air conditioning, basically. And the Johnny Depp documentary the Doors documentary was kind of weird. There were some things claimed about the Doors that were a bit, exaggerated. Like, it was the greatest band ever, and they were so avant-garde. And it's like, I think they were just kind of like any other rock band in their time. But then this Portuguese film came on, and we were just left like kind of agape. Like, what did we just watch? What was that? But again, yeah, one of the things I remember most about staying there. When You're Strange, a film about the Doors. Yep, that must be it. Narrated by Johnny Depp, directed by Tom DiCillo. But I wonder what that Portuguese film is. I even now having doubts. Was it Portuguese? Was it Greek maybe? I don't know. Again, I was dozing in and out because it had been such a hot day. And it's always a bit tiring to listen to a language that you don't understand spoken and then try and read the subtitles of a language that you're in the process of improving and learning, So that was a very mentally taxing moment. It wasn't like we were there to, get lost in the film and the story. Although my friend, of course, being half French, she was able to follow along the subtitles, at least. Much better than I did. And we also just sort of traipsing about. We played pétanque with some lads. That was fun. I fell in love with that game when I was living in France. I love it. And I mentioned it on the stream last week. Great little game. All right. Tulf asks, were you active on YouTube in 2008 to 2010? There were a lot of guys that I haven't seen or heard from. There was one who was called Scott Roberts or something. And then there was a German guy talking about astronomy and 1940s Germans a lot, and a Polish guy studying to be a lawyer in the Netherlands. Those were the days. No, I don't go that far back. I started my YouTube channel in 2017. I can check. 2017 or 2018? September 2018. Yep, that's when I started the YouTube channel. So no, I don't go that far back. Was YouTube around in 2008? How long has YouTube been around? I thought they just celebrated their 10-year anniversary like last year or 2 years ago. Or maybe that was Google. I don't know. But then Google owns YouTube, so I don't know. So as far as the other names you mentioned there, I don't know who would they be. Scott Roberts doesn't ring a bell. A German guy talking about astronomy. That seems familiar. I remember seeing some German guy that he was talking about that sort of stuff, but he was like an older gentleman, and he was really jovial. Maybe that's not the same one though. 2005. Oh wow, man. It's like in 2005, those years, I just wasn't online at all. Like even as a user, I didn't get a smartphone until 2016. So yeah, it's like I was not watching videos on YouTube in 2005. That's for sure. Didn't even know it existed. It was as draconian as today. Scott Roberts was banned everywhere. Really? Yeah, that name doesn't ring a bell, so I hope he's not someone massively important, and I'd be sounding like a complete dickhead for not knowing who he is. Okay. Looks like everything is quieting down as far as the chat goes. So I think we're gonna leave it there. Hope you enjoyed this cozy story stream. I think that's what we're gonna call it. Story time stream or story stream. Yeah, it could be a nice little name. I hope you guys enjoy the change of pace instead of talking about, the ills of the day or the current events, the current distractions, just something different. So I hope it was beneficial to you. Hope you enjoyed it. And we'll be back next Thursday with something very similar. All right, everyone. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your night or your day, wherever you are in the world. Bye-bye.